Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Poland and 3 EU partners are pushing Brussels to explore new ways of using frozen Russian assets currently in the EU to support Ukraine. The proposal by Poland, Sweden, the Netherlands and Spain calls for EU technical experts to examine the options, while ensuring member states share the associated financial risks. To lay this out for us, we're joined by Kinga Redłowska. She's head of CFS Europe. Kinga, welcome back to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you for inviting me, Ashim.
It's a pleasure. So, just a brief introduction. What are these 4 countries pushing for?
Well, those countries are quite rightly saying, look, we have 210 billion euros of Russian frozen assets that we frozen just after Russian full-scale invasion that are residing here in Brussels at a clearing agency, Euroclear. And we should be using that money to support Ukraine, to support bridging the gap in its budget, but also to support its capacity on the military front.
But why aren't we?
Well, historically I mean since the Russian full-scale invasion, there is a group of countries led by Belgium that is hosting Euroclear that are very much nervous about that move. They are saying there would be legal consequences of that action, and they are afraid, especially Belgium, but also France, that they will be solely responsible for a potential retaliation, legal retaliation from Russia. So that is what has been discussed in the past. That arguments have been brought forward by the supporters and those countries that are against the confiscation. The last iteration of those discussions ended up with no consensus, no decision, and back some time ago, in April this year, instead of confiscating Russian frozen assets, the EU decided to take a loan, 90 billion euros, to lend it to Ukraine to bridge the gap in its budget. But the funds, the Russian central bank assets, they have not been confiscated. And so because that hasn't happened, we are still once again discussing this. It's going to be probably put forward on the agenda early September when different working groups meet, called by Ireland, that is leading the EU presidency.
Okay, now, you explained that Belgium doesn't really want to take the legal risks in case it gets sued by Russia, but that legal risk has been discussed and shared. Most countries in the EU have said, well, yeah, we'll share that risk, just give Ukraine the money. So now what's the problem?
Well, exactly. And I think now we are just facing a situation where Europe and Ukraine, they have a money problem. They have a serious money problem. And because of that, countries traditionally opposing to confiscation might change their mind. So let me explain, Ashim. First of all, Ukraine, I've mentioned 90 billion of euros that EU decided to lend to Ukraine in April. So that covers only 2/3 of Ukraine's budget. So 1/3 is not covered. It's a gap. Secondly, we are all expecting Russia to escalate on the battlefield. Russia will most probably put more soldiers on battlefield, and we all know Ukraine cannot match that manpower. So the only response Ukraine can actually implement is technology, military technology. And we know that military technology requires money. So this is the gap, the deficiency, the gap that needs to be bridged on the Ukrainian side. we can also talk what's happening and discuss what's happening in the EU in terms of money.
Yes, well, let's do that. But just one final thing on the release of this capital, and that is that it would not be given back to Russia until Russia had paid reparations to Ukraine, and therefore.
Yes, exactly.
And therefore, surely, there really is no argument. I mean, it's simply a question of giving Ukraine the money a bit earlier, really, isn't it? I mean, letting it go now.
Well, yes, exactly. I totally agree. There is no logic in keeping those money untouched, while the EU taxpayer need to increasingly face the challenges, the fiscal challenges. Ursula von der Leyen just announced she will continue to push for an enormous EU budget of 2 trillion euros for 7-year period. There's already a backlash from countries such as Germany, the Netherlands. They are saying it's too much. We have our own problems. We need to make sure our internal security is properly covered. A lot of EU member states are increasing defense spending, including Poland. So countries across the EU are fighting back the sort of enormous need to spend money also to mitigate challenging economic situation in the EU. So in that case, every euro is being counted. So there is no logic really in taking yet another loan to bridge the gap in Ukraine's budget, which is currently at around 23 billion euros, to take another loan and do not make use of the frozen assets that belong to Russia, the aggressor.
Right. Now, I mean, there is the other side to this, of course, which is, these are sovereign funds. They belong to the Russian state. Now, Russia isn't the only state that has money, in the EU. If this money is used, won't other states start worrying about, the security of their money and actually pull their money out of the EU? China, for example.
Well, Ashim, I will ask you a tricky question. Where will they go? I mean, will they go to China? Is it more reliable than EU? I mean, as long as they are not planning to invade their neighbor, I think they could be certain that their money is safe here in the EU. So that argument really doesn't stand a debate.
OK, but so in that case, then what we're really saying is that the EU decides on whether or not you're allowed to invade your neighbour, and it's a stick that the EU can use against certain states. It now becomes a political weapon, doesn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say so, because it's more about economy. It's more about sort of investment. It's not so much about geopolitics in terms of central banks' assets. There are countries that traditionally have a lot of money. For example, Arab states, oil states. They need to invest the money somewhere. And traditionally, the EU is really the safest place on the planet to invest your money. Any country won't find a better, more stable economy with rule of law that actually can secure the stability and security of those funds.
So what happens now, Kinga? What is the process?
So now the decision makers will meet early September. And during different RELEX meetings, during different side meetings, we'll be negotiating once again what to do with Russian frozen assets. There's probably one country or maybe two countries, namely Belgium, perhaps France, that needs to be convinced. Again, Belgium is looking for financial safeguards, guarantees that Belgium won't be the only country that will need to face a potential retaliation from Russia. But as you mentioned, Ashim, there is already a consensus. We've heard declarations from many EU capitals that the countries, the EU member states, are willing to share the burden of potential retaliation. So I think I'm very hopeful. I think because of the money problem that I've mentioned at the beginning, there's going to be a consensus reached around the assets. I really, truly hope so.
OK, and do we need EU unity in coming to this conclusion, or can a majority of countries decide on this? In other words, how long would it take?
Yes. Well, it can take one night, it can take 2 nights, and it can even take another half a year. As does, if we don't reach a consensus now, this will be brought up yet again in half a year time. But I do think that consensus is quite possible, quite an option this September. Let's see how the conversation will go.
OK, so can we have countries, for example, I don't know, like Slovakia, who say, well, no, actually, we're not sure that, we want to support this. Can they block the process?
Yes, they can. So far, it has been Belgium that has been blocking this particular issue. But unfortunately, we see increasingly different countries playing their individual national interest to block certain decisions that can support Ukraine and counter Russian threat. So, for example, in the 21st EU sanctions package, there is a very worrying curve out for Greek ships that can still transfer Russian LNG. This hasn't happened before. It happened in July that this curve out was requested by one country. Let's see how it's going to work in the future with different kind of sanctions. In case of Russian frozen assets that we are discussing today, it's Belgium. Traditionally, Hungary was opposing a lot of sanctions on Russia, as well as Slovakia. There's going to be always a country that will try to block something. Therefore, we need diplomacy, we need negotiations, and we need a goodwill and sense of urgency that those decisions, they impact our collective security.
Well, let's hope we see a lot of all of those things, Kinga. As always, thank you very much indeed for laying out your analysis for our audience. Have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ashim, for having me.
Pleasure. Bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.